Cynthia, floor is yours.
Hello. So here we go. It's very nice to have you all with us today. And I am Cynthia Milani. I'm going to be your presenter today, as I've just been introduced, and I'm going to be sharing my experiences in the emerging field of neuroscience and diversity in a way that I hope is going to be very useful for you and working both with your families and with your clients and just about anyone that you know. So we're going to, as I have been presented, I'm going to be taking a look at my own past career and weaving that in with how I think that we can apply neuro leadership and diversity to what you're doing. So let's take a quick peek at Neurodiversity. This is a game developed for Diversophy.com. I see George Simons is with us in the audience, and a lot of the things that we are using today are actually the tools and the background information that you will find in there. So hopefully you'll get a chance to play with us one day online. We play on Thursdays, and that'll give you even more chance to see what is going on. So this is what I have been doing, and I'd like to start with where I began to maybe come full circle and give you some ideas of how you can apply this to your own field. So in the 80s, I was doing my field work in medical anthropology in West Africa. And I was working with people like this, who are doing incredible things with their mind, with what we might call spells, but how was this actually happening? What was happening at a mind, body, brain level? And the research that I did on this was we began to work with the Center for Biofeedback at the National Institute of Health to see how we could apply this to wellness. And we looked at everything from voodoo and zombies and this incredible power that the brain has over the body, but it was still, the field was at its infancy. So for me to be able to take that and apply it to what you are doing and how you're doing it, because it was the basis of what I would then go into with intercultural training, but we didn't quite have the science worked out yet. So in the chat box, would you write your field of expertise or interest so that we can see how this today, how I can best answer your questions and thoughts and look at the field of neuroanthropology, and the whole field of neuroscience as it applies to intercultural training, to consulting, to counseling. Give us an idea of what you're doing. All right. Cross-cultural management, great. What else do you have in there? Okay, training, coaching, diversity. Really, this whole gamut. Language, teaching is certainly another area for this. So, all right. Okay, well, I think we're getting a pretty good list there. And just keep them coming in. And please do feel free to use this chat to keep us so that we can take a really good feel of our audience. So why should we, I mean, neuroanthropology is a field that is growing and it is merging together with the sciences. But what about neuroscience? Why would we even be interested? Well, we know that the brain is wired for survival, and that's one thing that we're going to be taking a closer look at. And change causes threat and stress. Neuroplasticity, which we will be defining for you, can enhance productivity and make us better at what we are working on. So the real reason for the neuroscience is that the brain-based strategies build insight and trust, Effective communication reduces stress and motivates, and we're going to look at that in terms of the hormones, different levels, and you can override the reactive default mode that is like in your computer, it just automatically will command for you for your learning to use the control modes to make better decisions and manage unconscious bias. So this is the areas that we're going to look at that. And what are we going to do in these hours together? So for us today, what we want to do is take a look at the techniques and the models for brain-based trainings and coaching that will pair up with some of those things that you just shared with me. I'm going to challenge some of the old theories and analyze some of the new. So you'll see what you recognize and what the directions are in this field. And then finally, we're going to be providing you with I'm going to provide you with some really cutting edge tools that I think are very exciting to add to your professional toolbox. And that's really my goal, is to make something that you can really use from now to start to include neuroscience in your trainings. So, but why all this attention, and why are we focusing so much on these brain-based strategies? Well, first of all, obviously we want to move to theory, but in terms of the brain, it's an interesting thing, because if we use, for instance, the the thoughts of a car, say, or the car you drive, you probably have a pretty good idea if you looked into the motor what it looks like. But what about for your own brain? How much do you really know? How much of that can you help your clients with in the cross-cultural fields that you've mentioned when they're in crises or you're doing coaching? How much do you know that you can actually share? Well, let's take a look. And so I think we've got a survey, don't we? And Kristen, can you put that up for us? All right, take a moment to answer this. How well do you know your own brain? You know you have one, but you don't really know how it works. You know you feel you want something. All right, what are we getting? All right, we've got a pretty savvy crowd here. Okay. All right. Well, that gives us some totals. All right. Getting changes there. All right. It's pretty well spread out there in terms of, we don't have any neuroscientists, but we can identify the different parts of the brain. And that's one of the things I'm going to be looking in, because we've got different models that are out there. Okay. So we've got 37 votes. I think we'll close it there and leave it with somewhere in between, an average between they want to, something and not too sure, and to identify your parts. So let's go, and we'll stop the sharing and go on to the next one. Okay. So let me take a look at this. Who recognizes this? Put that in the chat box. Anybody know who this is? If we go way back into anthropological history, any ideas who this could be? Well, nope. All right, we got one raised hand. What is the answer there? All right, we've got one, and I'll tell you. She's Lucy. All right. And Lucy is goes back about 3 million years ago. She's an Australopithecus and one of our earliest ancestors. And if you go back 3 million years, you say, what in the world does that have to do with us? Well, actually, it's pretty amazing, because how her brain is wired is basically the way that we are still wired today. The human brain is 200,000 years old, according to most counts, and depending on who is counting. But like Lucy, our ancestors were steeped in a world in which it was just their environment was the cave, and that was their safety net. And once you went out of the cave, you really didn't know what was going to happen. Anything could be around the rock in front of you. So it was a question of, were you going to eat or get eaten? And you had to be very careful, and you had to have the strategies in place. And the one thing the brain is its function, its main function, is to keep you alive. Not to have a great time or fun, but rather to keep you alive and safe. And so to do that, we could take a look at this classic photo image here and think of how that could shape our brain. We're hunters, we had to come together to do that. We're in the cave, we collectively hunt. Alone, you don't survive. And like most species, you stay together. And this is what has given us a lot of our identity, but also a lot of our problems. And it's nature. I just bought these new fish in my fish pond. And I noticed that the fish pond, it's the same sort of a thing. The koi stay with the koi, the goldfish with the goldfish when you first put them in. And then they begin to figure it out. It's better to get together to look like a bigger fish. Well, this is a lot of the wiring that we have, which is everything is a threat until it is not, and to be aware of others. And of course, if you can see where we're going here, this has to do with a lot of the bias that we have today. And this is an example from the American actor, if you've seen him, Matthew McConaughey, and an NFL coach, player, Emmanuel Acho. And they sat down and they had a chat. And Matthew said, tell me what I need to know about being white and being, my biases, where you can see them. And they've started a series called Uncomfortable Conversations, because our hidden bias is something that is locked into us. And the good news is we can override it. And we have the ability of as you see here, that we define neuroplasticity as the ability to react to change by growing new neural pathways. And I think from looking at your numbers, most of you are familiar with this, but I'll still talk a little bit about it because it's really key to everything that we do. And that's that the way the brain is connected and the way it works, the neural pathways are like when we go out into the woods and we start walking through and there's no path. So we go a few times and we get a bigger path and a bigger path. And before we know it, we've got a road and we've got a highway. And so it is with our brain. And we want to be able to get those pathways to a point where we're really able to make new connections all of the time. And the brain itself, here is meet your brain. And the brain is has about 100 billion neurons. And it's the length, if you were to put these out the way that they're actually shaped, they're really thin. They would run, your neuron pathways run all the way from LA to London. And these cells are constantly communicating with each other. And the various parts of the brain, through a massive system, such a connective system, like the basal ganglia, which are just a whole conglomerate, can keep it working. And this is really key, because what you're seeing now is your brain, very similar. You can anybody put in there what parts they can identify? Let's see what we can identify. You got something out there? Can you see your prefrontal cortex? All right. And so what you see, we got a little bit. All right. Let me see your chats yet. Okay. Good. Getting it. You see. All right. Frontal cortex, known as the prefrontal, the amygdala. Okay, great. So what we want to do is get a little bit clearer on this for you. And so I'm going to go back to just say, having identified this, you're absolutely right. We have the neocortex, which is the newest part. We've got in this center part, this little center in the middle is where we can see the amygdala almost and the brainstem. So let's this is going to be the brainstem. We'll start from there. And that's the oldest part. And then we know that. And then we've got the limbic system in the middle. So put your thumb out and your fingers up, your thumb in. That's about where your limbic system is. Close it down, and you've got the prefrontal cortex in the front. And that's the smallest part. And it's easy to overwork that. So let's take a little closer look. And this is one of the first models that is a little bit controversial. And so if you're using it, I'd just like to point it out. And this is what we can look at is sometimes identified as Paul MacLean's triune brain. And if you've heard that, what it's basically saying is that what we did, here, the brainstem was the oldest, and then we crawled out of the water. We had, as mammals, we had to have a lot of emotions. We developed those, and then only later did we add on our human prefrontal cortex and the neocortex. Well, I just want to point out it didn't exactly happen that way. And so we want to we have different parts that have been there since the reptilian days. And it is, like I said, it's a matrix, and it folds in and on itself. And that is extremely important. So we say that the triune brain now is somewhat debunked, because we want to remember that it is actually a question of, yeah, 3 different brain areas, but it is one brain, and over again, it is a matrix. So your memory systems, all of these are connected together. Now, another popular model is that of the amygdala hijack. And so think of it this way. You've got your brain here, and every so often we just flip it. That prefrontal cortex has got way too much going on. It shuts down, and when we're criticized, when we're rejected, marginalized, or we feel fear, then cortisol from that logic center, this is from Goleman's work, from the emotional intelligence. He was calling this the primitive brain then, and this unleashes all of this cortisol. Now, cortisol, you probably know, is a pretty rough hormone. It'll attack your body, can lead to, it makes your heart beat, your heart pumps too much of it, overflowing over time. You can develop heart conditions, all kinds of things. But in the hijack, it's a process that can last for as much as 24 hours. But usually it takes about 20 minutes for this cycle to kick in. And the reason for this is because the way the brain is structured, remember, at cave drawing, fear is, and staying alive is most important. So millimeters, seconds, will keep ourselves from getting logical and using our logical thought. So meanwhile, we've got this cycle that goes on. And if you've ever woke up in the morning and you just can't get rid of those thoughts that keep on coming around, you're possibly in what Goleman would have called a hijack. And so what we needed to, one thing out before I go to my next topic. When we talk about worldviews and we talk about the current psyches, et cetera, political climates, worldviews, a lot of times what's actually happening is that people have gotten stuck in that amygdala, overactive limbic system. Think of these elections that went on in the US. Think of a lot of the issues that have actually been going on since the beginning of time, because leaders very often have known how to get people, what we might call in English, stirred up. What that is keeping that amygdala pumping away. And before you know it, what they have found in recent research is that actually conservatives, far to the right, et cetera, can have a larger amygdala because there's been a lot of the emotional that has gone through that. And so we are trying, all of us, no matter what the party, no matter what it is, to get moved out to some way to beat the system. So there are ways. And what I would like to share with you now is, I'm going to be giving a couple of models, and this is really one of my favorites from the neuroscience field, and it's called the BrainStates management, and it's a way of overriding our emotions and getting into control so that we can move to a higher state. And this was developed by Mary Casey and Shannon Murphy Robinson of the BrainStates management. And they have a wonderful tool and a profile that you can contact them and work with your clients for, that is a way to help through counseling, through coaching, mentoring, workshop, to get your clients to be, and yourselves, to be able to maintain that higher state. So they refer to the three brain system as the lower brain, the middle brain, and the higher brain. And in order to be able to get the objective here is to be able to make it so that it is not static. And in this slide, we can see that perception, choice, and self-awareness are in fact not static in the brain. We can control them as we consciously move from the low to the higher awareness, opening our perceptions, and as we reach our consciousness and these higher brain states. And that's when you're really working at flow, when you're comfortable with what you're doing, when the emotions aren't there, you don't have the body states that might be the fast heartbeat, etc., operating out of that middle brain limbic system. And in fact, they have 7 different dimensions that this profile can identify, so that you can match it up and see where you are, if you're taking the test, or the clients are, to be able to start to use the reframing and the language, the ability to move with a higher state. And of course, that's fluctuating. It depends on how much sleep you're getting, COVID situation, travel. And so the 7 base dimensions that help their clients have to do with maintaining that, have to do with the body states and the perceptions and their own self-awareness. And that can range from very low to very high. And as you become your higher brain state, you are much more conscious, you're much more open, and your perception becomes also what we might call clearer or less void of the emotional turmoil that can guide you. So this is what they are able to produce with this is the neuroplasticity and skill building to strengthen the capacity and operate for the higher brain. So this is how it works. You first recognize your brain state, you shift your brain state through awareness, through meditation, through deep breaths. I find that just reframing by reminding myself of, is this really valid what I'm thinking, by questioning it, by knowing that you are in that middle brain state, you can begin to maintain and maximize that higher brain state. So this is one way of accessing your open mind. They've used it a lot, thousands of times with many thousands of times with different clients that are working with inclusion and diversity, to become aware of where they were in order to move where they need to be, by consciously overriding it and developing the habits and the biases that they need. So it is all going back to that we are creating new connections with that entire incredible machine that we have, so that we can develop the new behavior patterns. And for those of you in the cross-cultural field, it's not only that bias, but you can think of what we have all gone through when crossing cultures, when we have had to just begin to make it in a new society, or culture shock, all of these kinds of things. All of a sudden, we begin to take it from the theory to being able to show actual brain states and how it works in the brain. So another model that I think is really great is the one, and something that you will often see referred to in the literature, is the SCARF model of social threats and rewards. And this is done by David Rock. He is he's the director of the Neuro-Linguistic Institute. And he coined the term neuroleadership in 2006 at a conference in Oslo, Italy. And that has really gone viral all over the world, as you will often see this model. So some of you will be familiar. And the first thing he says that since the brain is, you will note this arrow is larger, is geared for threat. That's the first thing we look at. And we want to move it towards get our dopamine going, because that's where the rewards come in, and the brain is driven by dopamine. So how do we do that? And so he's given he says the first thing we have to be aware of is status. And when our status is challenged, like for those of you who've crossed culture and all of a sudden have to do a different language, you can be even discussing among yourselves in the chats about when this has happened. People who become a leader of a company and they don't even have the language. I had somebody the other day say to me, but I'm speaking like my 5-year-old son. How do I get these ideas across? That status begins to decrease. So the other one that we know that we need is a certainty. And the brain is actually more comfortable with knowing something that is negative than it is with uncertainty. So when we have this model and we're working with leaders, we can show that it is very important for them to be able to, how they communicate. When we do our coaching, we can look at some of this. Are they giving autonomy? So I'm doing this now through a leadership point of view, and then we'll look back at the cross culture. So they need to be giving more autonomy to their staff. It's no longer the leader who had all the answers, but it's about whether or not the people, your staff, can get that aha moment. Let them do it for themselves. Relatedness in his model means how much together we are, and that's pretty clear. We all need that sense of belonging. We saw that from the cave. And these are the kinds of things, along with fairness, that the brain needs to be operating successfully. And because we are also working with that cross-cultural situations in which all of a sudden, you know, your clients, the people you work with yourselves will be losing that. Just knowing this model, the SCARF model, can be very helpful, because again, like the BrainStates, it's all about awareness. So we have a tool now that we can use to be able to demonstrate and to use in our coaching that is brain-based rather than theory. And in fact, we also have the ability with the imaging, with the new kinds of brain imaging, to see inside our brain. And that's what has changed everything for us. And it's been going on in the last 10 or 15 years. So it's just a little example of, take a look at this difference in the brain. What happens in the transformational, that prefrontal cortex of the visionary is very different than you see in something that is more mechanical, like the transactional. Not right or wrong, but different. And in the world today, we are finding that we need that vision because so much is changing. There's a rapid amount, the Vuca world, the unknown. We are looking for a different type of leadership, but it's just a demonstration that what is actually happening at the brain level, we know is very different. So I want to stay with that a moment and share what I think is very exciting when we can look inside our brain, is to take a look at this quote from Markova and MacArthur, that leaders who understand and maximize the different ways that people process information are more prepared to inspire and empower and meld the diverse intellectual assets within their organizations. Well, that's kind of what we've been working for, is to get this certainly in a situation where we can take people from all different cultures and have the culture be understood. As interculturalists, it's pretty much what our job is. So what we see here, and I'd like you to again put in your chat box, tell me what you see when you look at this. What are the images? Let's start to share. Just describe this picture. All right, let's see what we've got. goldfish. All right. And depends on your primary socialization. Okay, underwater, we got some more fish in the water. Okay. All right, well, we got a lot of fish here. And it kind of tells me where you are from. The Westerner is a lot more likely to see goldfish. We know that if I was doing this, because we have done it in Asia, we get much more description of the background. Water, we got water, seaweed, gravel on the bottom. And the fascinating part about this is, for the neuroanthropologists, is that we can actually see that this is a difference in our brains. So let's take a look at how that just might look. So this is work from Han and Northoff, and if you actually, Joseph Schultz shows this as well, to talk about where some of these differences are. And this has to do, what you're seeing now is the difference between when somebody is an individualistic, like in the last one, or the Western side, or whether or not they, from the Chinese, a different part lights up. If you say me, and you say mother, imagine your mother, the Western brain, and that's what you're seeing in this kind of blurry slide, is slightly different than it is for the Chinese. They come in different locations of the brain. And according to Shinobu Kitayama, who was one of our presenters at this wonderful Tabula Rasa conference in Florence a couple of years ago, he mentioned the fact that where does this come from? And for the neuroanthropologist, he went back thousands of years into Asia and said, well, we have a totally different, look, depending on whether or not somebody was rice eating, whether or not they were wheat eating, the brain begins to develop. But in Asia, there's more serotonin. People are more protected because they had, in the theory, a lot more disease. And that in itself starts to create a different brain so mother becomes much more important. Family connections become much more important in that society, according to Kitayama, for over thousands of years. We look at this, and this starts to get into the whole area of neuroanthropology and hormones, as well as the brain. And I want to share some of the thoughts that are coming. They're still pretty controversial and new, but this is one that George Simons shared with me, and I love. It's is it love, or is it just the oxytocin? Who are we? We've looked at our brains and what part are we operating, but what are our dominant hormones? It's not only a question of culture, it's individualistic. And this is showing the mother's oxytocin, which we call the love hormone. And look how in that baby, that's already growing. And it's not a surprise because, again, we're only there, the brain, to survive. And we do it through our hormones. So if you're interested in the field, I really suggest this new area of neuroendocrinology, where we're really studying the hormones. Now, this work is from Helen Fisher, and a similar project is being done by Deloitte Business Chemistry. She is a neuroanthropologist who actually, going back to the last slide, started off in the whole love area of looking at couples and why they ended up together. But after years of studying hormones and individual personality, it looks a little bit like the Myers-Briggs. For those of you who are interested, you might want to take a look at some of the story that's around the hormones. And testosterone is one that is a director profile. It's analytic, and it's that we're out here to win, skeptical, direct. And you might think of Margaret Thatcher. This is an important one, and it's changing. I mentioned David Rock and the Neuroleadership Institute. For them, the perfect profile of a leader is somebody with high, strong testosterone, but low cortisol. And cortisol sort of, take charge, and sometimes you think of it as the stress. So it's kind of a calm, quiet leadership that both men and women have, and the testosterone. And so it's not a male, a typical one. It is simply where they feel is the ideal type. Again, lots of controversy. You'll have to be thinking of your own opinions. So for those of you who teach negotiations, have you ever thought about what hormones might be operating? Well, estrogen is probably one that is pretty well, is flowing fairly strong as well. And if it's really done well, you hope you've got some of that good oxytocin mixed in with it, which is a one of binding. And this is a big picture, and these people have the people skills, they're imaginative, they have the compassion, they have empathy. And we can think of Mahatma Gandhi. Put in the chat box anybody else as you're going. Think of people that you think are clear. Talk among yourselves about this, and think about some of the teams, what you're looking for. You may need a builder. The builder has what the neurotransmitters and the hormones of serotonin. And that's a much more careful one. Remember, I mentioned the one about with Asia. It's the cautious ones. They're not going to be the first ones necessarily out to discover a new country, new job. They're not going to feel comfortable if they're pushed into it. So some of you on working with in the cross-cultural field with working with different types of clients, wonder what's going on with their different combinations, because these people are going to be more respectful of the rules, the authority. We saw it in Asia. We see it with Angela Merkel. There are other types. The explorer has a lot more dopamine. And we think of this, in fact, for Helen Fisher, that's one of the differences between these last two, between, say, Asia and the Americans. The Americans were, they got on those boats. They were curious. They come from a pioneer stock, curious, and they were ready to take on maybe life-threatening situations. You begin to develop a community that is like that. And it takes a course, you go through several generations, and those genes get passed on. So here we're into the whole gene debate. And I have to bring in whom I think is really a master, and hats off. She was certainly one of the developers and editors of the Neurodiversity series. And her book, The Intercultural Communication, is a must read. And she talks about when neurons, genes, and evolution join the discourse. And that's so exciting for us as interculturalists, because it's a whole different way, a much more holistic way of looking at who we are, to be able to consider the impact on our behavior. The reason that we need to be taking a look at that is you see that environment piece I just showed you. Our environment is changing, the world is changing, and it is going so fast. We have the reason for Elon Musk here is he is probably doing more for culture change and what is happening in terms of who we will even be as human beings. As we speak, it is possible he's working on computers that are attached to human beings. You can soon be getting a chip. If you want to learn Japanese, or if you want to know the entire field of how your brain works, buy a chip, get a chip. So as we do that, what are we going to turn out like something from a Star Wars bar, and everybody looking a little bit like a mutant? Well, it actually happened back in the days of Lucy, when Ramapithecus and Australopithecus, we became Australopithecus, Ramapithecus stayed in the trees. Who knows? But we're changing, and that's not going to be so easy for all of us and our clients to deal with. You can get a designer baby. Those are already happening. People are cloning their dogs. You have enough money. Barbara Streisand has cloned 3. I think it's about 30,000 per pet. You can clone your pet. What is that? We've got cats that are redone, kept in a freezer. One was, Garlic was his name, and the owner was able to wait a year or two, and he was able to clone Garlic. So what is this going to do in terms of who we are and our identities and what's happening? So I've been talking about the magnetic resonating, and these are some examples. And we are doing more and more to be able to understand our brains, how they operate. And as we are seeing, the tools to get the tools to override so that we can really get a control of our brain and change our brain and change our game. And so the tools that I would like to leave you with, some of them you have already seen. This is from Joseph Charles, and his last one that he did for SIETAR, along with Yvonne Van Poel, is his colleague. It's a wonderful list. And all these are certainly well worth adding to your collection. And it includes his own wonderful intercultural mind. It provides us with not only that firm basis for the foundation of our work that is based on fact, a scientific fact, but we get our new approaches. We can have the research that is just every month, it seems there is something new and exciting coming out. And the perspectives that brings, I challenge you all to really dive into this and see what it can bring you, because no matter what your interests are, no matter what your interests are, if you're plural, it takes it from everything from your cultural neuroscience, if you're interested in psychology, cognitive psychology, NLP, neurolinguistics, language. These are all some places for you to begin and to share with, to start WhatsApp charts, to combine it. I wanted to add a few for you here today that would be, some of them I think you definitely want to know about. This is from the first one we have here, is from one of the gurus in the field. And this is, wherever you go, there you are. And why is that? This is the work of John Kabat-Zinn, and you may know him, Zinn. You may know him more from the meditation side, but he was one of the first to really work with the brain, and got together with the Dalai Lama, the Harvard Project, to really see how that could work with, and Hanson, to see how we could, with neuroplasticity, begin to make that shift. And so he uses awareness and some of the techniques that breathing, etc., that you can actually quickly use and incorporate. Your Brain at Work is a classic by David Rock. And one thing that I like is when he talks about he explains very easily how that prefrontal cortex that we have, it gets so overloaded. And the tips are things like how you prioritize your work. It can only handle about 6 or 7 ideas. If you feel that brain energy that they talk about from brain states lagging behind, it's very possible that you're overloaded. So prioritize. You get it. Answer those emails at night. Have them all ready to send in the morning. Don't attack them all in the morning, because you may not have enough resilience for some of the harder projects that you've got coming down. So take a look at how you structure your work and how your clients are doing it, and they'll have a lot of tips for you. Stephen Pinker is the author of The Blank Slate. It is the idea that the brain is actually is there to be codified by shape, by the environment, by the hormones, and he works a lot with language. And that is also a useful one for taking a bigger perspective for where the research has gone and where we probably need to be looking. I've mentioned Mary Casey and Shannon, this is their book. I didn't see it included on the other. The Neuroscience of Inclusion, great for you who are in diversity. Anybody who wants to go into coaching, you have this Neuroscience for Coaches. It's excellent. Each chapter is well written and informative for giving you the science, the actual pure science behind this. And finally, you have David Lynn and Greg Downey's The Intercultural Mind. So that's for you who are interested in the neuroanthropology. So leaders in the Vuca world, where we're going for our future, then the heroic manager of the past, we expected to know everything. And they could do anything, and they could resolve every problem. The post-heroic manager asks a different question. He wants to know how every problem can be solved in a way that develops other people's capacity to handle it. Now, Charles Handy's been around for a while, and this is sort of a metamorphosis for him, because as we go into this unexpected world, it has to be one in which we're taking care of each other, where we have got a kinder world, if you want, but we've seen it with the COVID. We're all in it together. It's one planet and one people. So before I take your questions, I would like to end with something that the anthropologist toolkit, and that is we in anthropology, we're always looking at patterns, and those patterns we have found, just as where I began this presentation with several 100,000 years ago, we need to go to the past. We need to remember and look at the wisdom that we had from our old leaders, and what can they tell us about living our lives today. And I selected this one. And this is from the Mayan civilization, and it is a greeting. And when they met each other in the road or wherever, a stranger, they would say, "En lak ech alafan." Does anyone have an idea of what that might be? Does anyone know this expression? I'm not getting any hits, so I'll tell you. I'm the other you. I love that, because if we realize that we're all just stardust, and as we've seen now, we're one planet and one people, and we truly use that wisdom of the elders and reprogram our brain to be more protective, to use that oxytocin, to use that kind leadership of getting back to that scarf model, the autonomy, letting people thrive in helping to survive, then I think we're probably going to make it pretty well. So that takes us through this upcoming workshops on this subject. We've got lots of them, some new work coming out, neuroleadership coming up with neurodiversity, games to play. I invite you to workshops with colleagues on getting certification. We're doing some of them at our IgD retreats. Please join us. And most of all, I look forward to hearing from you. So let's take questions and chat and see what we look at. We've got some interesting comments. Could you please repeat the Vietnamese? Yes, I can. I'm going to put that in the Katimayo is his name, and I will put that in chat book and send that for you. Ubuntu, it's very much like Ubuntu, yes. And Ubuntu, for those of you who don't know, is Nelson Mandela has used it. Ubuntu was an anthropologist, to give you an example, went to an African village, and she's American, and she said to the kids, "Okay, everybody line up and I'll give you some candy. And whoever can beat it to this tree first gets the candy." And she was amazed when they all ran and held hands. And she said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Because if one," they said, "Well, we're running together, because if one person loses, we all lose." That's Ubuntu. And Nelson developed it. He used it. It's become very much a part of the culture. So let me see some other questions here. And I'm interested in this one to hear more about it. Gandhi and Churchill are in the process of being canceled. Gandhi for his wide range of, okay, well, that's it. That would do it. Sexual behavior and for his racist. Thank you, George. Okay, yeah, we need to take a look at that. I think we could need to look a lot at our heroes. It's the time for new heroes to arrive. So we've got some new messages there, and I'm glad that it's somebody enjoyed this. So do we have some time for more questions? Can I change this to our host now and get a little bit of dialogue going? How much time do we have now?
We have like 7 minutes left. So everybody who has a question, please feel free to put them in the chat. We have a couple more minutes.
Also, just discussion. All right, let's see this one. Let's just take them as they come. Why do we need to cancel our old heroes just because we have new ones? I don't think that's it. I think that our idea of who now we're able, just like we can see in the brain, we can now look at a hero. Take somebody like Mario Cuomo, who was a hero for a while in New York, and suddenly took a big fall. And so we are, what this is I think it's pretty great. We're becoming accountable. And now someone will find out, somebody will stand up, somebody will say me too. The people that did not have a voice have suddenly gotten a voice. I think that COVID, as horrible as it's been, and it has just passed through my family, so I'm rather sensitive to it, having ordered 7 kits, is also one of the things that has made us probably as an anthropologist to speed up the cultural awakening and development to a kinder, more open, the one we need now, just like we need infrastructure for hospitals, we need infrastructure for our leaders, for our humanity. And is there any implication for, I want to be sure I understand that, for cultures that score higher on the emotionally expressive continuum? The implication there, first of all, this is it's like the Myers-Briggs in it, so it's a very, but applied to culture, so it's a very broad one, and you have a lot of individualist change. And remember when I started, I said, these are the new ones that we need to challenge a bit. We need to look at skeptically, I think, and say, some of that might work for you. This is as I read this question, is a big subject. There is a lot fascinating stuff on, of course, on and all kinds of indices and ways we have of measuring different cultures and representatives of those cultures for emotionally expressive and how they deal. For instance, emotionally expressive, you're talking about things like the Arab cultures and how they differ from, some of the others we can imagine. So the answer is yes, absolutely. And the IgD RETREATS. Well, I'm not trying to sell, and I'm not selling. And the reason is because the Institute for Global Development, IgD RETREATS, I'm at a point in my career where, as you can see, I've been doing this relay for, it's the white hair, 30 years. And I just love to be able now to, here we're in Provence, not far from George, but I want a forum here where people, it's truly a forum where it's an olive nail, an H in olive nail. And so COVID has shut us down a bit, but we'll have webinars and a place for people to sit under the olive trees that we break out in the under the lavender and rose gardens, and we exchange the newest ideas. The people I've mentioned before, we certainly hope to get the BrainStates. They were supposed to be here this year doing certification. I'm also certified by them, so can do it. We'll put together some programs, but I like to bring people here. So we'll keep that going and keep in touch with us, and we'll let you know what the newest programs are. So how about some more? Anything else I can see or follow up? And Ann-Kristen was giving me questions. There is always room for more voices and more information. This is a brand new field in many ways, although I started long ago with just watching truly amazing things that the brain can do. We want you to be able to go from that theory to brain states counseling and coaching. And if I can help you in any way, you've got my name, you've got my number. I see some really good names here with lots of information as well. Let's keep this going and keep the dialogue ever present.
I just posted your LinkedIn profile in the chat, so everybody feel free to connect with Cynthia to keep the dialogue going, reach out and dive further into discussions. From my side, a big thank you, Cynthia. It was very, very interesting, amazing. Thanks a lot. And if we don't have any further questions, I think we can close the question here now. Thanking everybody for being with us tonight, asking your questions, participating. And I will also take the chance to announce our next session in September, which is a game session for a diversity space meeting. So it's going to be a space trip, an intercultural space trip. And with this, I'm going to wish you a nice evening. Thanks again for being with us and take care. And thank you, Cynthia, again.